Story 1. Picking up and disposing of dead animals, mostly farm animals that have died, involves trying to put a putrid corpse in a clear plastic bag and driving around in a truck filled with such things. The incinerator produces a smell you will never forget, along with the amount of fat and grease around that contraption. It's a horrible job for anyone, especially someone who likes animals, as you'll constantly smell like death and be subjected to spraying and leaking fluids of disgusting origin. If you didn't know, dead animals fill up with gas and can explode when you move them sometimes. Also, the flies and maggots can make you think some of these animals are still alive because they are moving under the energy of a few million larvae. I would not wish this job on anyone. Story 2. Being a caregiver in an Alzheimer's home lasted 3 months, and I was the only one who wasn't yet jaded and bitter. It was soul-crushing, and I still feel guilty about leaving the residence with the other employees. The worst was a woman who was in the early stages and knew what was happening. I started putting her to bed last so I could sit and hold her hand while she cried herself to sleep. It eats at you. Story 3. I sold accidental death insurance by cold calling people from the yellow pages. My boss chain-smoked in the office and boasted about the times he slept with underage teenage girls as a full-grown man. Every moment was pure hell. Story 4. Tech bro startup brewery. They burned through £1 million pretty quickly, and I was made redundant when I pointed out they were at least 8 months behind schedule. Story 5. It was my job as a security officer for the Jordan Creek Mall in West Des Moines. The women in the mall constantly laughed at us, and the men did not respect us. Women did not want to be with us, and men did not want to be like us. Every morning when I put that plastic badge on and looked at myself in the mirror, I was disgusted with myself. I was a minimum wage loser who wrote tickets for people parking in handicap spots and called the police to do my job for me. One time I wrestled with an obese woman in Victoria's Secret who was trying to steal a bra and got beaten up, and the local news showed footage of it. Story 6. It might be the one I'm currently doing, middle school public school language arts teacher. I'm quitting after this year. I've held jobs in food service, offices, and retail. This is worse. Story 7. I once worked in a store where the boss kept changing the rules, and the tense atmosphere made even lunch breaks feel like a luxury. It taught me how crucial respect at work is. Story 8. Lasted 8 months as a Starbucks barista in a rich area before losing all faith in humanity, faith in others' ability to be competent and have common sense, and a will to live. Story 9. Floor staff at a nightclub. I had to collect empty bottles and cups that people would leave on the floor. It involved a lot of getting pushed, injured on broken glass, being ignored by people too big and strong to move out of the way, and getting touched for a laugh. Leaving that job was such a big positive for my mental health. Story 10. Kitchen hood and exhaust cleaner. Very dirty and greasy, unstable hours, and weather conditions because you're outside. Only night shift. Climbing onto sketchy roofs with sketchy ladders that were almost always unstable. Not the greatest pay. Expected to do tasks close to risking your life for pitiful wages or get fired. I refused to do certain jobs due to the extremely unsafe conditions at the job site, and I ended up being fired for it. We were using a broken ladder to climb 2- and 3-story tall buildings for months before it got replaced. Lack of working equipment. If you weren't prepared to risk your life for the company, you were removed rather quickly for having a bad attitude. My experience. Story 11. Dang, these jobs don't sound so bad. I'll bite. Worked at a marina, which at a high level sounds great, but one of the tasks was emptying the sewage from the boats. It's called a pump out. You hook up a 2-inch diameter hose to the boat and basically vacuum it out, but it never went as well as planned. Usually, the threads were gunked up by previous sewage or corrosion, so you just had to hold it there on the threads and look away so you didn't get splashed with human feces in the face. Keep your mouth shut too. Flick on the loud vacuum and just hope the hose started shaking. Otherwise, you had to diagnose. It was all turds. No one uses their tanks for urine or showers, etc. I've been coded a few times. If it was bad, I'd go home and shower with mouthwash. I always kept a garden hose nearby, as I felt the quicker I could wash the splatter off my legs, the better. If we were lucky, there were some disposable gloves. otherwise just barehand it and wash off after, then go ring it up at the cash register. All 3 generations did this job, to which my grandpa always said, "Your waste is my bread and butter." Brutal. We should have charged more than $20 for this job. Story 12. I was a waiter at a kids' restaurant, which had a bear as its mascot. The new guy had to be the bear on their first day, which meant putting on a massive bear costume over our waiter's uniform, including a huge fur head that you could barely see out of. You were then led around the place to wave at the parents and play with the kids, once per hour. If you spoke, you were fired, as some of these kids were return customers who would recognize a waiter's voice. Wanting to impress my boss, I really hammed it up. I danced, I gestured, I goofed around. I sat on a mother's lap. I ruffled a father's hair while he growled, "Get off me or I'll stab you." The boss loved it so much that he made me be the bear every day I worked there, which would be great, except it was August, and so hot that the restaurant's air conditioning broke. The bear suit hadn't been washed in the history of the restaurant, so served as a memorial to the sweat of 100 fallen waiters. Little kids would run headfirst at the bear and headbutt my testicles with depressing regularity. And all it earned me was the disgust of my wait team, who thought I was goofing off work by being the bear, since it was clearly easier than carrying 2 plates of reheated lasagna across the room and refilling drinks. Story 13. Retail assistant at a department store. Had to put items back on the shelves when people came through and tossed everything everywhere. Made me hate people. Story 14. My year as an electricity enforcer. It was a call center job for a power company. The call center part didn't bother me, as I had worked several and was good at it. So when a center I was at shut down and I got hired at another, I didn't think much of it and was promoted to second tier quickly since I had experience with higher support levels. Except that second tier at a power company meant that 99% of the calls I fielded were from people who got shut off and wanted to argue about their bills. Every single shift, all day, every day, was non-stop arguments with screaming people who hated me. And all I could do was play enforcer because that was literally my job. There was no internal support, no higher authority I could escalate to. I was there to be a stonewall until they paid up, and that was it. The psychological toll of the non-stop fighting was immense, and when I quit the job, it took me months to get another one because I basically had post-traumatic stress disorder from the mental trauma. My hand would actually start shaking if I even had to pick up a phone at home. Story 15. Many years ago, more than I care to admit because I'm old now, I worked as a cart pusher at a grocery store. No matter if it was rain, sleet, snow, hurricane, or blistering heat, just like the mailman, we were out there gathering up shopping carts in a gigantic parking lot where the store was uphill. We had to push these things uphill too. It got me in really great shape right before I got into the army, not gonna lie about that, but it was still really unpleasant. Story 16. Peach Cannery. 90 degrees and 100% humidity. The noise was nearly unbearable. I was a peach scraper. I had to use what looked like an oversized squeegee to pull peaches that had fallen off the conveyor belts, shovel them into crates, and drop them into a huge container. By the end of your shift, you were covered in sticky peach juice. If they got a late load of peaches to process, you did overtime whether you wanted to or not. Story 17. I've had a few bad jobs. Physically, the hardest was a vegetable farmer. Those guys work. I lasted 3 days. I've done construction and deep-sea fishing, which are hard, but manual labor on a vegetable farm is just another beast. I show up, and the boss says, "Okay, we're going to spread peat down this whole farm." The field was like a kilometer of tilled earth that I had to carefully shake peat onto from a scoop made from a milk bottle, bent at the hips, in the scorching sun. And that's just one row. There were about 70 or something rows. Tough guys, man. I can't believe they did that for a living. Definitely deserved to get paid more. Story 18. I worked kiddie rides at the local amusement park for a summer. I had a 5-year-old kid call me a bad name after I buckled him into his seatbelt and wished him a good ride. I got yelled at a lot. I have heat and sun sensitivity from my medications, so it was miserable on a physical level. I had a messed up, painful, pus-leaking toenail for most of the summer. The people giving us breaks would often not get to me in time because people who work at amusement parks are terrible employees and just disappear for an hour instead of their allotted 30 minutes. One time I had blood sugar issues and was shaking and lightheaded but could not go on a break because the break person was missing in action. I cried. Kids ages 18 months to 2 or 3 years old riding their little kiddie rides are adorable. 4 to 8-year-olds are generally little troublemakers. Tweens are all awkward and tall and going through growth spurts, which is disconcerting, like little moody aliens. Teenagers think they're so cool. They're not. Parents are the worst. Story 19. I worked at CVS Pharmacy as a pharmacy technician for a year before quitting. It was easily the most depressing and stressful job with a high turnover rate, in an area with customers who were more of the old money persuasion. Story 20. Starbucks. There's a line wrapped around the building from open to close, always understaffed. Lots of the drinks cannot be made quickly, and customers were openly hostile and disrespectful. Honestly, Starbucks was worse than when I worked in factories, and that's saying a lot. Story 21. Waiting tables in a United States breakfast restaurant on Sundays when the after-church crowd came in. There were a few exceptions, but overall they were the rudest, most entitled, most demanding, and stingiest group of people I've ever dealt with. And that was 50 years ago. I'm sure they are a lot worse now. Story 22. I worked for a beekeeper. We were responsible for half-working 20-year-old trucks and forklifts. They often broke down, which is immensely problematic when you are loaded with honeybees, as no mechanics or tow trucks will help you. We often had to drive around way stations because the boss saw laws as more of a guideline. Getting stung is common. Think of a single job that has physical pain as a regular job hazard. African bees are a thing. Bees at night are mean as heck. When you load beehives on trucks, someone has to walk on top of all the hives to put the net on and tie the thing down. Bees almost always crawl up your pants and sting you all up and down the legs and knees. Bees aren't the most dangerous critters. Big, mean spiders, including black widows, love the bee boxes. Snakes, scorpions, and centipedes live in and around the hives. Plus, mice and rats love living in the boxes, among other things. It was agriculture, so there was no overtime until 10 hours in, and never double time. I worked for $14 an hour. Most entry-level jobs paid around $12 at the time. I worked over 20-hour shifts often while I lived out of my car. My longest single shift was 28 hours. Google Maps was super new when I worked there, so the boss always used hand-drawn maps. It is so easy to get lost on random farms without real maps. We had to travel every summer, which was awesome for me as a single guy, except the boss didn't want to pay for travel, so we all had to load into one truck for the cross-country drive. Being in a car with a bunch of Hispanic guys and improperly stored miticides was not my cup of tea. Even worse, we all once shared an apartment. The list goes on. But that was my first real job and by far the hardest and most unpleasant one I ever did. I opened my own company after that. Story 23. Cleaning boy at a bar when I was in college. I worked mostly night shifts. On the first day, I entered the toilet at around 2 in the morning. I vomited so much I almost passed out. Some guy had puked in the toilet while soiling his pants at the same time. That smell still haunts me. Story 24. Quality control at a plant that made rolls of sheet metal. 8 hours of sitting and staring at these giant sheets as they were spooled out, looking for defects. Can't look away. The next person over was about 15 feet away, so I couldn't really have a conversation either. I did 2 shifts and decided I couldn't do it anymore. Story 25. I spent one day cleaning carpets with a company that specialized in scamming housewives and the elderly with bait and switch any room for $19.95, deals that were aggressively advertised all over the place. My training period involved another new guy and myself being driven around the high desert by our meth head instructor who showed us the finer points of their scam, which involved really deep cleaning a very obvious spot in the middle of the customer's carpet as a color safety test. That would really show the customer just how clean the carpets could be and stand out like a sore thumb if not done to the rest of the room. This deep clean, however, would not be $19.95, but $100 per room. If the customer rejected this amazing upsell, then we'd only vacuum quickly, spray some water, and leave behind a damp carpet and get out of town as quickly as we could. Our instructor loved to brag about how often this scam worked and how much money he and the company could grift off of people. After my 10-hour day, I just drove back home and never picked up my day's pay out of disgust. Story 26. Buddy convinced me to hire on with the roofing company his dad owned. 16-year-old me in over 100-degree Texas summer weather, carrying bundles of shingles up a ladder for 6 hours. I lasted one day. Story 27. I took a job telemarketing for a newspaper while the newspaper was on strike. I didn't realize it when I took the job. Every time I tried to call somebody, they said no because of the strike. Story 28. In high school, I had a job where I cleaned the suites at a hotel that was commonly used by newlyweds. To this day, I can't look at the mirror behind a hot tub without both smirking and cringing.